Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. My name is Nazia Imtiaz Hussain, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Alliance Organization, I'd like to welcome you all to our first and important webinar of 2022. In today's webinar, we will be talking about Islam and mental health, a taboo subject in the Muslim community, which usually leads to embarrassment and fear for the community members who do have mental illness. This is a serious issue that needs to be addressed so that those suffering can get the help needed. The stigma surrounding mental health is something that every community deals with, even in this current day and age. These stigmas are even more pronounced in traditional religious communities. Mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Mental health does not only affect the way we think, feel, and act, but also how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. We will be discussing the connection between mental health and Islam and some of the misconceptions about mental health in the Muslim community. This evening, we are honored to have Mr. Nouman Ali Khan, who is a well-known Islamic scholar and Arabic instructor. Before starting our session, I would like to share a little bit about Mr. Khan. Nouman Ali Khan is the founder and CEO of Bayyinah, as well as the lead instructor for several Bayyinah courses, including the fundamentals of classic Arabic and divine speech. In 2005, Nouman Ali Khan launched the Bayyinah Institute while simultaneously teaching tajweed and reading essentials in New York and New Jersey. His first exposure to Arabic study was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he completed his elementary education. He continued Arabic grammar study in Pakistan, where he received a scholarship for ranking among the top 10 scores in the National Arabic Studies board examinations. But his serious training in Arabic began in the United States in 1999 under Dr. Abdus Sami, founder and former principal of Quran College, Pakistan. Nouman Ali Khan developed a keen methodical understanding of Arabic grammar. He further benefited from Dr. Abdus Sami by internalizing his unique teaching methods and later translating his work into English for the benefit of his students. Mr. Khan served as professor of Arabic in Nassau Community College until 2006 and has taught modern, standard, and classical Arabic at various venues for nearly 7 years, with over 10,000 students nationwide. Currently, he has dedicated himself to a 7-year-long project of conducting a linguistic and literally focused Quranic tafsir series in English. He's also the author of 2 popular books, namely Divine Speech, Exploring Quran as Literature, and Revive Your Heart, Putting Life in Perspective. He has been named one of the 500 most influential Muslims globally by the Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Center of Jordan. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure that our members and friends will benefit greatly from tonight's session. Over to you, Brother Nouman.
Thank you for having me. Bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I thought that this conversation, I'd like to open up for as many healthy exchanges as possible. I know this is, like you said, in many circles in Muslim communities, a taboo subject, the correlation between Islam and mental health. There's a lot that can be said about that, but I'm going to just preface some things from within my field. I want to make some introductory comments that I think will help frame the discussion. So my particular area within Islamic studies is focused on a study of the Quran and Islamic history pertaining to the Quran and linguistics surrounding the Quran. That was my first area of interest, but while I was doing that early on, I've always been a student of psychology. So, and as a result of that, I couldn't help but notice the correlations between the worlds of the humanities, particularly psychology, but also sociology and political science, and the study of the Quran. I also noticed that there's a pretty big gap between the understanding of the text from a psychological point of view, or at least elaborating it from a psychological point of view. And that actually has led to a very dehumanized narrative about some of the things that are found in our sacred literature. And I think it's really important that we, pay attention to some of these dimensions. And I've tried to do that on several occasions in different surahs and different stories in the Quran. So what I want to start off with is that in many Muslim cultures, when people are going through a psychological issue, right? So they're going through, let's just say they're suffering from anxiety, or they're suffering from depression, maybe even clinical depression, or they're suffering from, some kind of trauma that they haven't really healed from, and they haven't really processed in a healthy kind of way. They even might be suffering from issues pertaining to self-image and projection. There are all kinds of things that may be at play. But when any of those, those things manifest, or they become enough that family members notice, or friends notice, or anybody knows, then the first line of defense is, oh, you just need to recite some surahs and blow them on yourself, or you just need to go talk to an imam, and your iman must be really low, and that's why you're acting like this. And there's a denial of the problem is attributed to be a spiritual problem, as opposed to being a psychological one or an emotional one, as if the religious solution is purely a psychological or purely a spiritual solution. And that's where the problem is. And that's why thousands of people, I can tell from their email or their message to me that they're going through some serious psychological trauma. They're going through something very, very, very much something that requires a mental health professional's intervention. But at the end of it, they're saying, which surah can I recite? Or which dua can I make that can help me with this problem, right? So the first thing I want to put out there is that this idea that the Quran is a set of prescriptions that are going to help solve your psychological issue is something we have to combat. There is a spiritual component to healing, and it's incredibly powerful, but it's actually a component. It's like someone saying, just the way we think about, for example, somebody says, hey, I have high blood sugar, or my doctor diagnosed me with diabetes. I don't want to take insulin, but can you tell me which surah I should recite instead? Nobody would be insane enough to do that. If somebody was told you have a heart condition, if you don't address this, you're going to need stents, or we're going to have to, this might even get to the point where you need to do surgery. They're not going to say, no, that's not a problem. I'm just going to eat a couple of bananas and go do a umrah, and then, make a couple of du'as and I should be okay. Nobody thinks this way. But when it comes to mental health disorders, psychological disorders, and actually clinically diagnosable things like depression, like anxiety, and sometimes manic levels of those things, then we say, no, this is purely a spiritual problem. Just tell me what I need to be doing more. What prayer should I be doing more, right? The other thing that we've done is we've created this false narrative that is not representative of the Quran, where somehow Allah is responsible. God is responsible for the abuse that a human being is doing to another human being. So here you have a situation. Let me give you a hypothetical, and I pray that Allah protects everybody from these kinds of situations. You can have a hypothetical circumstance where a son is abusive to his old father, his disabled old father, and he's verbally abusive to him, or vice versa, a parent who is abusive to their young son, right? And now the son or the daughter or the victim of this verbal abuse or psychological abuse is reaching out and saying, how come Allah is not changing my situation? Why is Allah so unhappy with me? This is not a manifestation of God being unhappy with you. This is a manifestation of an ongoing cycle of abuse that has its own background. And if you don't address it in a proper way and think this is somehow divine intervention and Allah has cursed you to be in this situation, then we're only perpetuating this problem even further. And this leads later on not only to a much deeper psychological crisis, it's coupled then also with a spiritual crisis, because we're trained not to see the responsible party as the responsible party. We have turned God into the responsible party, and that leads to all kinds of internal conflicts. So most of the time when I've met people that are having a faith crisis, I would argue almost 100% of the time, it is actually an emotional crisis. And most of the time, what they're attributing to be God's punishment is actually their inability to set healthy boundaries, or to recognize abuse as abuse, or to have very false projections of themselves, self-hatred, guilt, I'm not worthy, I'm not the good child, I'm not good enough, I'm a terrible wife, I'm a horrible husband, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of self-hate that's been induced. And then on top of that is Allah must not love me, Allah must hate me, and that's why this is happening. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to really take out and expose how the Quran, in a very beautiful way, actually, time and time again, in the way that it describes certain stories, highlights some very profound psychological dimensions. The story of Yusuf, entire papers could be written on every scene in the story from a psychological point of view. The story of Musa alayhi salam the same way, the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam the same way. Just to give you a small example of that, so you have some, I'm not only talking in abstracts. You have, for example, in Muslim cultures, the death in the family, right? When there's a death in the family, let's just say the mother is crying her heart out because of the loss of her son or daughter. And people are coming up to the mother and saying, sabr karein ji, sabr karein, please have sabr.
Right.
Please have sabr, right? Now, this is one of the worst things you can do. Because now, one, she's already traumatized by the loss of her beloved child. On top of that, she's now being told that she's not doing so well in terms of her faith because she's not meeting the standard of sabr expected of her.
Right.
Now, if you compare this to what's happening in the Quran, you've got Yaqub alayhi salam who lost his son Yusuf. And he doesn't know what came of Yusuf. He doesn't know if he's dead. He doesn't know if he's being abused. He knows nothing. And not knowing gives you no closure. And the man is living for several years, arguably decades, without closure. And in that time, he is consistently crying, Ya asafa ala Yusuf. Oh, what tragedy fell upon my beloved little Yusuf. Until wabiyaddat aynahu, the Quran says his eyes turned white, meaning he actually went blind from the over crying. And not once did the Quran come out and say he should have had sabr instead of crying. In fact, this is the figure in the Quran that Allah attributes the words patience being beautiful. In other words, you can have beautiful manifestations of patience, but it has nothing to do with you expressing your sorrow and even crying. Crying is therapeutic in some cases. It's necessary in some cases. You have to allow somebody to cry. You have to give them the emotional space to be able to do that. And the Quran acknowledges that. It's remarkable. And it's so crazy that, supposedly religiously minded people will come and tell someone, no, you need to have sabr, you shouldn't be crying so much. Yeah, you want to give that lecture to Yaqub alayhi salam or something? This is crazy. So that's the opening statements that I wanted to make, that there's a profound need to highlight the incredibly empathetic, understanding dimension of mental health, psychological health that has been highlighted in the Quran on numerous occasions. And that has somehow, we've turned a blind eye to it. And it's really fundamental and critical that we restore that, because it will be emotionally healing for us, and it will also be spiritually healing for us. So those are just the opening comments. And I really wanted this session to be about questions, concerns, curiosities that you folks might have, the people that are on this panel might have, the audiences might have, that we can have a healthy conversation about.
Thank you very much. So we'll start our question and answer session with our president, Dr. Aisha Zafar. Aisha, do you want to start?
Gee, thank you. Thanks, Brother Nouman. That was very helpful, especially that part about sabr, because that's something I've seen recently. There were a couple of very young deaths, and but I also think people are very uncomfortable. They really don't know what else to say. So
Right.
That's all that they're going to come and say. So we did get quite a few questions from our guests. One of them is, what is the most common misconception you deal with regarding mental health in the Muslim community, and how do you address that?
I think that if I was to put a number one culprit, it would be that seeking mental health is somehow the acknowledgement that you are a crazy person. you are fit to be hospitalized. There's something deeply, fundamentally wrong with you as a human being. It's a humiliating thing to seek mental health, seek counseling. It is, something to be terribly, terribly ashamed of. And so the first defense mechanism is, I don't need that. I just need a dua or something. I don't need a counselor. What's a counselor going to do? What are they going to tell me that I don't already know, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a dismissive attitude towards the value of getting therapy in a constructive way, and not realizing that therapy is not someone telling you what to do, but therapy is actually, it's one of its most fundamental mechanisms is allow you to process your own thoughts in an organized way, to get a an outsider's perspective on how some of the internal conflicts can be resolved. So that would be, I would put that at number one. Number two would actually be what I said earlier, overwhelmingly confusing the abuse that is perpetrated by individuals and considering that somehow to be divine punishment. And that confusion between the two, like somebody's being punished by Allah because their mom thinks that they're a loser, and that's Allah's punishment for them, right? Or that's their destiny in some way, instead of actually proactively saying, Mom, I know you're upset, but what you're saying isn't acceptable. It's not okay for you to speak in these terms. This is not okay. And in fact, the other thing that I embedded in my comments was, it's based on real life situations, people saying things sometimes detrimental, horrible things to their parents and sometimes to their children. Things like, in Urdu, say, Allah tumhe kabhi maaf nahi karega. Allah will never forgive you. Like, what gives a human being the right to say that on behalf of God? Like, what self-righteous position does someone have to, what throne does someone have to sit on to be able to speak on behalf of God and decide who God will forgive and not forgive, just because you're upset? You're not able to forgive, and you're going to tell someone else God will not forgive them? And then we'll have the audacity to say things like, on Judgment Day, I'm going to tell Allah everything you did. As if on Judgment Day, Allah wants to hand you the microphone and, take it away. You handle Judgment Day now. As if we're not even afraid of what we're going to be. We're the ones answerable. We're not the ones questioning God on Judgment Day. He's the one questioning us. So there's a lot of, really deep psychological abuse that's done in the name of religion. Like within Islamic disguise, psychological abuse is conducted. And it's internalized, and it definitely has to be challenged. It absolutely has to be challenged. The moment in any family situation, personal or intimate situation, the religion or any religious text is being used to win an argument, you're already engaged in a form of religious abuse. That is not okay. I've been studying Quran for 23 years. If I'm having an argument with my wife and I start throwing ayat of the Quran at her, shame on me, because I'm disrespecting the Quran and I'm engaged in religious abuse, right? But this has become common practice. Right. Allah will not forgive. You know what Allah says about people like you? You know what this hadith says? You know what? No, do not weaponize religious text. That's sacred word, and that's one of the most common, forms of abuse and forms of misconception, that people think they can do that. Even sometimes people's questions are framed in abusive ways. Hey, what do you say about a person who does this? Didn't the Prophet say these people will go to hell? And what do you expect me to write back? Yes, so that you can show your husband, see, he said yes, that means you're going to hell. So this weaponizing of the religion in order to win over an argument, to get some kind of closure that this person's, I'm not able to punish them, but I just want to feel better that God is going to get them good. This vindictiveness, this is so deeply unhealthy, and we really need to challenge that and filter that out.
Excellent, very well presented. This is the same as, we see a lot in our culture when there's someone born and raised here like someone and they want to get married. And you'll hear that often, that the mother said, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, you'll never be forgiven on the day of judgment, because this was done without my consent. And I don't think a lot of these kids will go out and seek, like they'll talk to someone like you or seek any professional help with that. But I do see a lot of people suffering because of that, because
So
it's something
let's
coming from the
talk about that
parents.
example for a moment. A mother that says, you're doing this without my consent, therefore you will never be forgiven for it. Let's process this. Let's try to go inside the mind of such a commentator. So this mother has, unfortunately, you can tell she's framed the relationship with her son or her daughter around control. The fundamental premise of the relationship is control. It is not empathy. It is not understanding. It is control. And when you're starting to lose control, you will use anything you have in your arsenal to regain control. And one way to regain control is to say, what a disappointment you are. I'm dying because of you. You must be happy that you're doing this because you're killing me. Nobody's killing anyone, but it's okay to dramatize it so that you can, the son or daughter can internalize the guilt. I'm killing my mother. You're not killing anyone. Then if that's not working, then let's take this further. You will never have salvation on Judgment Day because you didn't listen to me, right? Now, I'm going to be controversial here, but I'll go out on a limb and say this because it should be said. Musa alayhi salam was traveling. He ran away from home. He ran away from Egypt, where his mother lived. And he ended up in the deserts of Madian in Surah Al-Qasas, Surah number 28. He met a bunch of girls that he helped. He ended up with at their father's house, who then proposed that he should marry one of those two girls. Musa alayhi salam did not say, hold on, मैं जरा अम्मी को call कर लूं. Like he didn't say that. He didn't go back to Egypt and risk his life and say, hey, mom, there's this girl. She's not from my culture. She's from Madian. We're from the Israelites. Is it okay if I marry outside my culture? Because there's a good rishta right now. But I came here to get publicly executed by the Pharaoh, but I just wanted to make sure I get your okay first, right? What is the Quran telling us? There's actually an openness in Islam, and there's a very tight restrictiveness in our cultures. And it's crazy that South Asian cultures have this more, but Arab cultures don't, African cultures don't. Turkish culture doesn't, Malaysian culture doesn't, Indonesian culture doesn't. Those are Muslims too, but they don't have this. But South Asians have this, even their Hindus have it, their Buddhists have it, the Muslims have it. This is not an Islamic issue. Overly exercised parental control into the personal lives of adult children and guilting them into submission, shaming them into submission, this is actually a South Asian phenomenon. Of course, it shows up in other cultures, but we are the masters of it. We teach the master class on this stuff, you know? And you have 35-year-old men who want to get married for 10 years. They've wasted their youth away because their mother said no, which is, I don't know how these mothers expect to answer God on Judgment Day. Let me put this from an Islamic point of view, because in our religion, I should not, as an individual, I should never feel guilty about something that Allah does not want me to feel guilty about. If I'm doing something, if I'm wronging someone, if I'm taking something away from someone, if I'm violating a right of God, I should feel guilty. If I'm stealing, I should feel guilty. If I'm lying, I should feel guilty. If I'm being promiscuous, I should feel guilty. That is a healthy form of guilt because I've actually done something wrong. But in Muslim cultures, guilt is not associated with doing something wrong. Guilt is associated with doing something against the will of someone who's defined their relationship with control. This can be done by husbands and wives and parents and sons and daughters. So a wife can say, the husband says once in 2 weeks, he says, I want to go out with my friends to play basketball. And the wife can say to him, Acha, you don't care about this family, why don't you go? No, have fun. Really, I want you to enjoy yourself because that's what you just want to pretend that you're sick. I knew you never loved me. And the guy will take it in and say, you know what, I'll stop going. This is a part of me. I'm not doing any wrong. I'm not violating any of your rights. I was just going to play some sports with my friends. But because this bothers you so much, now I took something halal and made it haram on myself. Let's use Islamic words for this for a moment. I took something halal and made it haram on myself. What does Allah tell his prophet? Ya ayyuhan nabi, lima tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak. Prophet, why do you make haram something for yourself that God has made halal for you? Now, this is a psychological principle in the Quran. Don't allow any human being in any relationship to create barriers of haram that God did not create. If it's not wrong in the sight of God, then no human being gets to come and tell you, no, I don't like it though, so I'll play God for you in this case. And the poor son or daughter will say, but Allah is okay with it. Yeah, but we're not talking about Allah right now, we're talking about me. You know? So this is the thing that has to be challenged, even from an Islamic point of view, and especially when it comes to parents. Sometimes, with all due respect to our parents, sometimes our parents don't even realize where their overly controlling behavior is coming from. This again will be politically incorrect, but I'm going to come out and say it because I think it's time something should be said. So here's my analysis, and there are people that are professionals in this panel. You're free to question me on this and critique these thoughts. This is a theory. This is not fact. I'm going to disclaim what I'm about to say. Overwhelmingly, South Asian and many Muslim cultures' moms were treated like garbage by their in-laws. So they're grandmothers now, but they were, in their generation, they were treated very, very badly by their in-laws. And they came into the joint family systems, and they came into these systems where they were essentially told, either explicitly or implicitly, you are here to serve us. This is not your house. This is my son's house, or this is my house, and you are just here to stay in your lane. So understand that you have no say here, and you have no value here. And then once that was established, the only time this woman would have value is if she gave birth to a boy. Okay, if she gave birth to a boy. If she did not give birth to a boy, God forbid she had a miscarriage, God forbid she gave birth to a girl, then the kind of psychological abuse our mothers faced from their mother-in-laws and others, sister-in-laws, others. It's phenomenal that a huge chunk of this abuse is coming from women against women. It's remarkable to me. But this happened. And what happened is our mothers developed a really deep worthlessness. They internalized worthlessness. And their entire worth was projected onto this boy that they gave birth to. So our moms became overly obsessed with their sons because their entire value was infused into the son. That's the first time somebody congratulated them. That's the first time somebody said Mubarakah. So that's the first time somebody put their head on their head and made dua for them. They feel good for the first time about themselves in their life because of this boy. Now what has happened? You've created a lifelong dependency because this woman cannot fathom, she can't possibly imagine the moment where this son will no longer be tethered to her, because the moment that tether is broken, she's going to go back to worthlessness. And she's terrified of that. And that fear of it makes her destroy any prospects of marriage for him, because she sees a girl as he loves her too much. That's a red flag. That means he will be tied to her, which means he's not going to be tied to me as much anymore. The mom won't even be able to verbalize this openly. And the son will be like, my mom loves me so much. Why does she hate me right now? Why is she doing this to me? She's doing this to you because she's terrified of losing you emotionally to this woman in your life. And if somehow you fight tooth and nail and you finally get married to the girl you wanted, now her job is to make sure that this relationship turns as ugly as possible, because when it does turn ugly, he's gonna come back running to mama. That's the hope. And if not, then mom will act like the victim of the new wife, that she's disrespectful, she did this, and try to create situations of chaos and sabotage. Why? Because in those sabotage situations, the wife will say, I didn't sign up for this, you're not standing up for me, you need to challenge your mom. And the guy in the middle is like, Islam says I have to be the best to my mom. And my wife is now telling me this. And I want to be good to my wife, but I want to be good to my mom. And what happens to most men? They freeze in this situation. They freeze. They're like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going out for a walk. I'm going to go for a drive. They check out. And it creates these horrible situations for the mom, for the daughter, for the son, for the future generation. It's crazy. And this is perpetuated millions of times. If this was one isolated case, I wouldn't talk about it. This is happening millions of times in our culture. And this is not every case. Obviously, there are cases where daughter-in-laws are the monster and the mother-in-law is the victim. But this every time there is an abuse situation, behind it, there's a generational trauma, I believe, that needs to be processed. And we need to be able to equip our young men and women on how to deal with this trauma with empathy. If a son was able to be brave enough to go to his mom and say, you know, doesn't matter how much I love her, nobody will ever replace you. And he reinforces, he creates a new wiring in his mother's brain. You might actually be surprised at what kind of changes you will see. But the problem is, if he says, Mom, I think you need therapy, you have a codependency issue. Or Mom, you have paranoia. You know, because Mom, you know, or he says to the wife, I think you have, you know, you have a depression, or you have the, they'll say, oh, you want to diagnose me? Right? And it's going to turn into a war inside the house. So when we say mental health is a difficult situation in Muslim cultures, yeah, it is. It's like stepping on a landmine. You want to die with somebody's words? Mention mental health. I think you should see a counselor. Try saying that to your mother and surviving. Try saying that to your dad and surviving, you know? So these real life situations need to be addressed in a way that is safe. First of all, they need to be acknowledged that the victims of such abuse are sometimes the abusers themselves too, that the victims of such abuse are definitely women, and the victims of such abuse are also definitely men. If we don't develop holistic empathy for all parties involved, we're not going to find a solution. This is another thing I'll say to you, this is again off the cuff. I know I should be taking questions, but it's on my mind, so I'll say it. We are now in this era of victim culture, right? So we're celebrating in a modern social media era, everybody's turning into a victim, right? So it's gotten to the extreme where a teenager playing video games in his house, and his mother says, when are you going to do your homework? Stop abusing me with your words, Mom. I'm a victim of your judgment. You know, I'm not going to be your victim. So we've celebrated victim culture. Islam does not give us the license to portray ourselves as a victim. It gives us the power to see ourselves in a challenging situation and to overcome it. It actually does not allow me to say, it doesn't matter what's been done to me. It doesn't matter to Ibrahim if he's been kicked out of his house and he's homeless, he doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from, or Yusuf is sitting inside of a well and then sold into child slavery. He's clearly a victim, but he's never going to declare self-victimhood. He's going to have a powerful outlook on life, right? It's a very empowering message, actually. There's a grit in it. There's a toughness in it. There's a mental and emotional fortitude in it that needs to be delivered, because once you develop victim mentality for yourself or somebody, or you allow somebody else to develop it for themselves, because you know, a lot of times the most abusive people are also really convinced that they're the real victim. They're really convinced that they are actually the sacrificial lamb in all of this, right? And this, those of you that are versed in psychology, this is one of the most dangerous forms of narcissism. Narcissism isn't just about I'm better than everyone. Narcissism also, everybody should feel sorry for me. Why doesn't everybody feel sorry for me? You know, and that it's so powerful that a person can create a bubble around themselves and live in that alternative reality. And it's very hard to shatter that bubble. But I think through an empathetic message, by way of empathy and by way of training young people, families, even elders to create healthy boundaries and sustain them, I think there's hope. I think that we can make things better, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Sorry, I go off the cuff. I gotta control this.
I think Nida can ask the other questions now.
Yeah, sure. So on the more like child parent perspective, you know, in this day and age, social media is very forward. It's something that a lot of kids are doing. And I feel like anxiety and depression, like within that age group, is becoming very apparent, partially from that reason. And I feel like it's very difficult for kids to address those mental health issues with their parents, because a lot of them pretend like they don't exist. So my question to you is kind of like, what is your response to the kids who struggle with having parents who don't believe that their mental health issues are real issues?
I think that my message first is to those parents before it is to those kids. You know, social media giants that have now taken up so much of our brain space, these people hired addiction engineers that were the top addiction engineers in Las Vegas in the gambling industry and brought them over to Silicon Valley to engineer addiction to social media. So a lot of the successful social media giants have actually deliberately created addictions. And those addictions have led to many, many deep psychological disorders.
Right.
I, as a parent, would think a million times before if I take like a bag of heroin and hand it to my son or daughter, because it's an addictive, dangerous, deadly substance. I would not even hand them a pack of cigarettes because of its addictive power. And yet, the same exact kinds of neural responses that have been studied in substance abuse are now being exhibited by people that have social media addictions, digital, addictions. And yet we don't consider this a dangerous thing. We're actually giving iPhones for Eid. Like, it's the same as giving drugs for Eid. This is a new drug. So, and countries like China, where technologies like TikTok emerged, they've put barriers on what you can show for their kids. They have hours on when they can, they're 40 minutes a day of TikTok. And even when the swipe, after a few number of swipes, it automatically stops. And now they're actually even adding a feature, or if they've already added it, they only see science experiments, history, learning, and they're purposely pushing, semi-pornographic, pointless, mindless material over to Western countries because they want the future generations of theirs to be protected from psychological disorders and to be smarter, and they want our future generations to be depressed and dumber. And this is actually literally, this is not conspiracy theory, it's documented, it's it's public information, right? So first of all, young people now that are living in this unprecedented information age need to be self-aware. If you don't protect yourself in this, you're actually, going on social media is the equivalent of you walking 10 miles away from home. There's no parental supervision. They're nowhere to be found. You don't know who you're going to run into, what they're going to say to you, how that's going to affect you. And you're walking in a dangerous neighborhood and you never know who you're going to run into and what they're going to say to you. So if you're serious about protecting yourself, then you need to, even as a young person, recognize the damage this can do to you long-term. Please do, and cut yourself out of it. In fact, for young people, I even suggest, unless it's supervised or unless it's highly restricted, they should not be on social media. It is not a good place. It's not even healthy for adults, forget kids. It's not even healthy for adults. If you're going to consume social media, have a very limited form of consumption that is actually productive in some way. It has remarkable benefits, but the toxicity of it is not a joke. It's absolutely not a joke. Now, when it comes to young people trying to explain their mental health issue to their parents, unfortunately, when you come from a culture where mental health issue is a non-issue, that's just you making excuses. I think I'm depressed. Yeah, everybody's depressed. It's okay. Right? So that the lack of understanding of it is something, it's as horrible as it is to be expected. What do you expect? They've never been, their own mental health issues were never acknowledged. Right? And the only response they were ever trained to receive is the only one they're going to give. When their pain, they were never put in a position where they could express their pain. They're uncomfortable with you expressing yours because they never had that. So they're like, why are you doing what I never did? I'm not used to this. This is not okay. You can't do that. I don't know what's wrong with you. For kids in those positions, I highly recommend school counselors taking advantage of them, taking full advantage of them, not to blame your parents, because we can't blame someone who doesn't know better. Right? This is not out of evil or vindictiveness. They just don't know better. They just haven't been educated. And maybe if the school counselor was able to reach out to the parent and say, hey, I think we have something I'd like to talk to you about, right? Then because it's coming from a position of authority, it's coming from someone who knows what they're talking about, there's hope that that can be taken more seriously. So it's sad that I have to tell kids not to directly approach their parents because it's going to make things worse, but go to their school counselor instead. But thank God that we have, at least in the United States, Canada, we have the institution of school counseling, and they're saving lives. And we all know that they're inundated right now at schools. They're overwhelmed, but at least that resource is there. I would strongly urge that kids take advantage of that, inshallah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Also, honestly, to go along with that, I feel like also a response has to do with the fact that a lot of people degrade those who have like mental health issues or bring it up. So do you feel like that's also part of the problem, that there's that stigma around having mental health issues in general, that they also just don't want to acknowledge that fact because of that?
I have a few thoughts about that. The first thought I have about that is because of social media, some very delicate and precise terminology has become common terminology, right? So words like depression, anxiety, words like mental health, words like toxic, narcissist, bipolar are being used by people who have no business using those words. They have no idea what they mean. They don't know the seriousness of them. They don't understand the science of them. And they're just using them because they just heard that word being used by so many people and now they're using it themselves, right? So on the one hand, I want to caveat that the popular culture version of mental health is actually very dangerous. It's actually very problematic. Now, everybody wants to broadcast their emotions. And everybody wants to, they go through a heartache, they go through a, heartbreak, they go through an argument in the family. Next thing you know, they've got a meme posted on their page about when they say this to you, you should know that blah, blah. What just happened? You're broadcasting why? Because you want to see somebody say, "Aw, praying for you, I love you." Like you want virtual validation for your digital emotional expression. It's psychotic to me. Personally, it's psychotic that we've become that, right? So on the one hand, it is an object of ridicule. To some level, we've turned it into something laughable, right? A word like abuse is now being used in so many situations that actual victims of abuse are being diluted because everybody feels like they're abused, So we have to restore the sanctity and the seriousness of some of this terminology. The second thing I would say is people that don't know how to deal with something find different ways of dismissing it. And one very common way of dismissing it is to joke about it. Laughing something off is a very powerful defense mechanism to deflect the subject and to get somebody to not bring it up again. Oh, look at this one. She's depressed, everyone. Yeah, here's the depressed one. Depression, right? Depression? Yeah. Oh, And so and why are you so depressed all the time? Like, what is it? There are people starving in different parts of the world. Why are you depressed? So you're going to get this kind of mockery, right? If you know that's the case, then first of all, if the last time you were vulnerable to someone and they used it against you in that way, then you should know not to open that door and let them do that again. There are people very close in our lives, boundaries, right? And part of the boundary is I shouldn't be vulnerable to people who can't handle vulnerability, that are going to make things worse for me. Your emotional authenticity is a very valuable asset. It is not cheap, and you should not give it out freely. There are people who deserve to know the inner you, and people that have clearly demonstrated that they can't handle it or they will be reckless with it, they don't deserve to have it anymore. So you can be with them, you can be courteous and cordial, but you can also be safe, because it's going to blow up in your face later, right? And then when they say, you don't talk anymore, you don't tell me anything that's going on, why are you shutting me off, et cetera, then you can actually say, because you can't be, I'd love to open up to you, but only in front of a counselor or in the presence of someone else. Now, people like that, you want to have others in the conversation that you trust before you engage them in conversation. Never on their own, because they can come back and reconstruct the conversation that never happened on their terms. right? And then you'll really feel like you're crazy because like, that's not what I said. What are you talking about? I never said that. You never did this. And they'll have an alternative history entirely. So, and we have a lot of that in our culture, unfortunately, like absolute, abject, shameless lying about what someone said and didn't say. And Allah ki qasam is thrown out like it's nobody's business. No, I never said this. I never did that. What are you talking about? You know, we're so good at it. There's so, I mean, I'm impressed at the level of acting some of our, some of us can do. This is really convincing.
I agree.
This is why I think boundaries is an important conversation. Vulnerability is an important conversation. And study this stuff, learn this stuff. Serious, not just by watching TikTok videos, like actually study this stuff, take it seriously. Just like we take our physical health seriously. It's, you know, our minds are a commodity that Allah has given us and we should preserve it. And we should know the things that disrupt it, inshallah.
Nada, before you ask the last question, it's almost time. I didn't realize how fast the 1 hour, you know, we just didn't have enough time. But yeah, we'll continue. We'll have another 5-10 minutes.
Sure.
I am so sorry. We will not be able to have the participants, you know, ask their questions because we had over 200 questions. So we will try to.
My goodness.
You know, yeah, exactly. So that tells you how many people need help. We will try to ask as many as we can from you, and then maybe we can have another session. So Nada, go ahead and please ask your question because I didn't want people who have raised their hands, they want to address that. So I'm so sorry we will not be able to do it in this session. Go
Sure.
ahead, Nada.
So finally, I would just like to know, what is one message you want to make sure people who learn from you, especially on this subject, walk away with? What's like your message?
If you don't have someone to talk to that you feel safe with, seek a professional counselor. Make sure that they're licensed. Make sure that they have a good track record. And you do not have to make sure that they're Muslim. They have to be good at what they do. They don't have to share your faith. That's not what you're going to them for. They're not going to convert you into something else. They're there to help you emotionally.
Right.
Some of my closest friends, and I don't mind saying this, I've gone to therapy. It's helped me tremendously. It's one of the most priceless assets in my life is the time that I spent in therapy. And it is actually not only emotionally and psychologically beneficial, it's spiritually beneficial. I think it's spiritually, it makes you self-aware. It makes you realize the tendencies you have. It makes you realize why you do what you do. What you didn't realize was a part of your process. And self-awareness, there's an axiom in Arabic, "Man arafa nafsahu arafa rabbahu." Whoever knows themselves, truly knows themselves, gets to know their master, right? So that would be my number one advice, is to actually acknowledge for your own self. Don't think that this is because you're crazy or because you have a problem or you have a disease. I think you should think of therapy as an opportunity to detox your mind for a little bit. You know, to like a cleanse, like a diet cleanse, like a physical exercise cleanse. It's like that. Think of it as a break for your mind, you know, a reboot. And I think it can do wonders. Inshallah, you're able to find somebody professional, somebody good, that can walk you through some of those steps, and you'll see the benefit in it, inshallah.
Thank you.
We still have 5 minutes. So one
Okay.
thing that I wanted to ask you, when I have spoken to like young children who are always like, I'm afraid to talk to my parents about my mental health, my depression, my anxiety, because I'm always told it's a sign of weak faith. And I'm a good Muslim. So if I have anxiety or depression, does that mean that I'm not praying enough? I'm not a good Muslim?
Excellent question. Allah told the Prophet ﷺ, "La tahzan," don't be sad, which means the Prophet was sad, which means Allah didn't say you have no faith or you have weak faith. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ لَيَحْزُنُكَ مَا يَقُولُونَ. We already know that things they say to you make you very sad. They depress you even. Allah acknowledges that hurtful words can cause somebody depression. They can make somebody sad. And Allah didn't say after that, how dare you become sad? You have faith. Allah didn't say to Yaqub alayhi salam, how dare you have anxiety about your sons going into Egypt and be worried and fearful. When sadness, anxiety, fear are talked about in the Quran, Musa alayhi salam was talking to God directly. Listen to this. Musa was talking to Allah directly, face to face, not face to face, but like through the flame on top of the mount. And what did Allah say to him? Allah said to him, go to the Pharaoh. Go back to Egypt and face the Pharaoh. Okay. He's not in Egypt. He's all the way in the Sinai desert. He's on top of the mount. And if he goes back to Egypt, they're going to execute him. But Allah told him to, and he's a prophet of God. When Allah tells you to do something, you do it. And you know what? If Allah tells a prophet of God to do something, they'll absolutely do it. But Musa alayhi salam turned around to Allah and said, Ya Allah, I'm afraid that they're going to call me a liar. And my chest is going to become tight. I'll get anxiety. And then I'll become tongue-tied. I can't do it. Then give this mission to Harun instead. I'm no good for this. I got too much anxiety. I'm too scared. They're going to call me a liar. They're going to humiliate me. My emotions will get overwhelmed. I'll have a hard time breathing as my chest becomes tight to the point where I'm not going to be able to speak. So please give this job to Harun. I can't do it. He told Allah that. You think about that? Like, he didn't say, we say, when Allah says something, we say, we hear, we obey, right?
Right.
How come he didn't say, I hear and I obey? I'll overcome my emotions because I have Iman. And Allah didn't say, how dare you get scared? How dare in my presence do you say, give this to someone else? And then he added, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَنْ يَقْتُلُونَ, and they have a crime still on record against me, and I'm afraid that they're going to kill me. Allah could have told them, you don't know that life and death belongs in my hands? You're going to tell me who's going to kill you? The one who gave you life and preserved it to begin with? Allah could have given them a real good sermon there. But you know what Allah said? Kalla, don't you worry. Not at all. He acknowledged all of his anxieties, every one of them. And in doing so, what has Allah done? Allah has acknowledged, even for prophets, their humanity. Your emotional crisis is part of what makes you human. It is not a testimony to your lack of faith. If this was the case, the Prophet ﷺ would not be overwhelmed with grief when his uncle died, or when his wife passed away, or when he was moving to Medina. Ibrahim alayhi salam would not be devastated when he was leaving the house. Yaqub alayhi salam, I told you, wouldn't be crying himself blind. There's deep trauma and sadness in the Quran, and it's been validated. So for someone to say that you don't pray enough, and that's why you have these emotions, is really, it's a really cruel thing to say. It's a really heartless thing to say in the name of a merciful, loving religion. Like, what an unloving thing to say. It's shocking to me. So if a child, I'll tell you a true story. I was in Bahrain. I went to a school, and they wanted me to give like this talk to kids. These were 4th graders to 8th graders, right? So these are elementary and middle school kids. And there's 500 boys, 500 girls, and they want me to give a lecture. And they're all about formalities and like stages, and the principal is standing in line, the camera crew and all of it. No, this is not an authentic setting. These kids cannot open up in this way. So I got up on stage and I said, I'm not giving you a lecture. I just want to talk to these kids, and not on the mic, because no one child sitting in a group of 500 is going to be themselves when they open their mouth and the entire crowd is staring at them. I'm just going to walk into the crowd, and if any of you kids want to talk to me one-on-one, you can. And so I walk through the crowd, and I started with the girls' side. It took me a good hour and a half to get through the girls' side. And every single one of them that came and talked to me, what do you do if you feel lonely? What do you do if you feel sad all the time? What do you do if you're depressed? Lonely, sad, depressed, lonely, sad, depressed, lonely, over and over and over again. And my heart sunk. Like, these are our ummah. This is the future of our ummah. Kids around the world, and they're feeling these feelings all the time. All the time. Do you know what that means? That means that in 10 years, in 15 years, when these kids are adults, they have been conditioned to suffer from loneliness. And you know what they're gonna do? They're gonna make choices. I wanna do, now that I have my own independence as a young adult, I will do everything I can to get away from this loneliness. I just don't wanna be alone. I had enough of it. I don't wanna be alone. And they're gonna make some of the worst decisions of their life because they were suffering from some terrible, terrible loneliness. You can't say, why couldn't they just talk to their parents? Clearly, their parents were not acknowledging that. They were sleeping on the job and thinking, since there's food on the table, it's okay, we don't have to address it. So we have to get our kids to open up. We have to have real conversations with our kids. I'm telling you, it's sad to me that kids are asking this and we have to tell parents. We really have to tell parents something. You cannot be a parent and just say, hey, did you eat dinner? Did you do your homework? Hey, where do you want to go this weekend? And take them on a trip, take them to the mall, buy them some stuff, and you've done your job as a parent. No, you haven't. You have not done your job. Amazon could have done that job. You can give them a phone, they can order whatever they want on their own. You're an app at this point. You're not a human being. That's not, they don't just need an ATM machine. They need a human connection. They need to, and you cannot ask them yes or no questions. How was your day? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. Who are your friends? People. That's what you're gonna get. And then you say, "Mujhse baat hi nahi karte." They don't even talk. They don't even open up to it. That's because you don't know how to talk. Have you ever asked them, "Hey, what did you think about? When I was young, I did this, this, this. Did you know that?" They're like, "What? You did that?" "Yeah, I got in pretty big trouble." And then they start saying, "I did that too." Like, really? Yeah, I thought that you were always mom. No, I wasn't always mom. I was pretty crazy. Here's what I did. Be vulnerable to your kids. Open up, share stuff. And you know what? You'll find them sharing stuff. Tell them not your best stories. Tell them some of your worst stories, some of your fears when you were growing up.
Yes.
And then ask questions like, have you ever felt something like that? Man, that was scary. Like, if you can get your kids to open up to you emotionally, then you can help combat their loneliness, because then they can come to you and you don't have to prompt them. They will come talk to you because you're the best person to talk to. Why do you think the Quran says Yusuf alayhi salam walked over to his dad and said, I saw 11 stars and the sun and the moon in my dream? What boy tells his dad a dream? What 10-year-old boy is going to go tell his dad a dream? You know what that means? That dad created such an incredible, nurturing, welcoming environment, an intimate environment, a vulnerable environment where my boy can tell me anything. He could tell me anything. And he knows I'm going to listen. He knows I'm going to be there for him. Create that for your kids. It's not hard. It's not hard. And if we look back at our own childhood, we wish we had that. Some of us wish we had that from our parents. They didn't know. But now you do. So don't repeat the cycle. Inshallah.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Nouman. It was absolutely a beautiful, insightful session. And I think all of us would agree that we would love to have you back and talk some more. Dr. Aisha Safar, do you want to say something? Nada, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to thank you. This was one of the best presentations, such an interactive talk and so informative. And I really do hope that you will come back.
Keep up the good work, inshallah. I think the fact that you're highlighting these things is a really valued service, and I really appreciate that you're doing that. And I pray that Allah gives you more and more opportunities to reach more and more people and get people to reach out to you in ways that further this cause and normalize this conversation. And we're actually able, at the end of the day, we're able to help families in their most personal lives just live better, lead better lives.
May Allah bless you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
and
thank
all
you
of you.
very much.
You're quite welcome. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.